Good evening, viewers. Welcome again to Discovering Truth, and I am Pastor Forbes from Abiding Word Ministries. Tonight I want to discuss maybe a two-part discussion on when we go through situations that are challenging, how we come out of them. And I will be reading from the Old Testament book of 2 Kings. There are two kings. There's a first Kings and a second Kings, and I'll be reading from chapter 4. For anybody familiar with the Bible, this is it's a well-known scripture, but there is a principle that I would want to use and apply to what we are discussing. So I want to read from 2 Kings chapter 4, from verse 1. I will read the 7 verses. It says, "A certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to prophet Elisha, saying, 'Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant feared the Lord.'" He reverenced God. "And the creditor is come to take my 2 sons to be his slaves." So Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" And she replied and said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil, or a pot of oil." Some translations of the Bible will say a cruse of oil, a container. Then the prophet said to her, "Go, borrow vessels from everywhere." Vessels are containers, so borrow containers from everywhere, from all your neighbors. Empty vessels. Do not borrow just a few. "And when you have come home, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons. Then pour from that oil in that jar into all those vessels, and set aside the full ones." So she went from him, shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured the oil out. Now it came to pass, when the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." And he said to her, "There is not another vessel." So the oil ceased, or stopped to flow. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said to her, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest." Like in any teaching in the scriptures, the Old or in the New Testament, it is always pregnant with so much meaning in its primary interpretation, as well as in its general application. In its contextual meaning and understanding and interpretation, we can give it a localized truth, because the story was spoken to a woman who had become a widow, whose husband served God, was a prophet, was a servant of God. He died, and it appeared after his death that there were a whole lot of debts, obligations, IOUs he left behind. This woman, from my understanding of the story, must have tried to settle the debts, pay them off, and probably she couldn't. And because she couldn't, the creditor was less than charitable and decided, well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to enslave your 2 boys. I'm going to take your 2 sons as my slaves, and probably work out some kind of servitude scheme where they will work to repay what was owed. Certainly the impression created here is that the debt must have been huge. For a creditor to reach to the point where he wants to take your 2 children, that should give you comfort at the passing of your spouse. If the creditor comes to take them, then it means that the debt is huge. The woman cries to Prophet Elisha. It's a good thing she does. She knows where to carry her complaints to. She doesn't take it to the wrong place. Sometimes we burn energy in the wrong place. You can passionately tell somebody something, but when you finish, if you discover that they cannot help you, chances are you have wasted energy and you have expended yourself in the wrong place. So she went to this prophet and said to him, please help me. My husband, who was a servant of God, is dead. And my husband feared God. He was righteous. But because he was righteous does not mean he was financially smart. And he accrued debts. And as I said earlier on, maybe she tried to pay, and maybe she couldn't really reach a critical point where the creditor would say, okay, I understand, I'll give you time. He resorted to taking the two boys left. So it's here she's lost her husband, and while she's comforted by the presence of the two boys, the creditor is coming to take the two boys away. Now, this may be a specific story, but it speaks all too often of the kinds of situations we can find ourselves in, some inadvertently by our doing or our not doing, some by bad financial planning, some by absent-mindedness, sometimes we forget, some by not setting priorities, some by not planning and budgeting well, some by just being greedy. Everything we see we want to buy, whether we can afford it or not. Sometimes we get into these situations because we have not yet deciphered the difference between an asset and a liability. Because sometimes a lot of the things that we jump all too suddenly and often to buy to enjoy in life, when we look at them in very critical terms, they are liabilities. They are not assets. They are not going to add value to our lives. They are not even adding intrinsic value and capacity to themselves. Rather, they become liabilities which hang around us. They lose value. They depreciate in value. We probably depreciate in value by using them. And at the end of the day, they are not long-lived in their beneficial potential or use towards us. So there are many reasons why that can happen. Sometimes it could be external stimuli that is visited upon you. In financial terms, if there's a currency imbalance, if the currency drops, or things like that that are outside of the power of our control, and they bring you or they bring me, unfortunately, in that situation where you are struggling. You have to come out of this crisis and you do not know how. A couple of steps are important. Number one is to acknowledge that you are in a crisis, because if you don't, then you may think all is well when all is not well. So it's to acknowledge that you are in a crisis. Step two might be to understand in some measure how you got into that crisis. What were the pointers, the precursors, the ingredients, the building blocks for that crisis, so that when you see them again in any other form, shape, place, or demographics, you can identify them quickly as pointers and precursors and building blocks to the kinds of tragedy that befall you when this happens. Thirdly, is the ability, or the humility rather, to seek for help. Seeking for help is not just speaking. Seeking for help is also having an attitude that says, I want to come out of this. You know, I want to have a payment plan. I want to do something. I want to exchange equity or 4 hours every day for the next 3 weeks, 5 days a week to redeem my good name. When all this